Hey there, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The Vanished Miner of Nome Ridge. In early summer of 2019, a seasonal miner booked a bunk in Nome and walked the ridgeline above town alone. He carried a used metal detector, a battered pack, and a claim map folded into quarters inside a plastic sleeve. Several weeks later, searchers traced his tracks to wined, scraped gravel and a shallow cut marked by recent shovel bites. Locals reportedly still point to that slope when the north breeze lines the tundra grass and the sea turns gray. His name was Daniel Kerr, 48, a heavy equipment operator from Fairbanks who prospected small leases during seasonal breaks and layoffs. Archived notes kept by a borough clerk say he told the front desk he wanted 3 quiet weeks near Anvil Creek. He paid cash for a room 2 blocks from Front Street and asked for a ground floor unit facing the alley. The clerk wrote that he spoke calmly, carried no visible weapon, and wore rubber boots with dried clay seams. State records show Kerr renewed a limited entry claim the previous winter and mailed 2 small payments from a post office kiosk. The county file from 2009 includes a faded survey of the same bench, annotated with pencil arrows around a shallow tributary bend. Some locals claimed an older prospector had washed flakes there after a flood rearranged bars along the creek mouth. Investigators never confirmed whether Kerr knew those stories, though a library sign-out shows he borrowed 2 regional mining guides. On a Tuesday, dispatch logs recorded a weather advisory for dense coastal cloud and intermittent drizzle, with ceiling low and visibility variable. A taxi receipt in his room lists a drop at the Dome Creek pullout just before noon, with gear loaded in careful stages. A store owner later told troopers he sold Kerr fuel mix, replacement hose, and a handheld radio that could scan aviation traffic. None of those items were recovered at the site where his footprints ended among scattered cobbles and straw-colored sedge. The first person to sound an alarm was Lena White, 36, a clerk who managed checkouts and kept the lodge keyboard. She reportedly noticed his key still hanging late Thursday, then again Friday morning, with bedsheets unwrinkled and towels folded inside the rack. Her archived notes mention 2 missed conversations about a package and a quiet guest who nodded often but avoided long exchanges. She called the non-emergency line and asked whether a welfare check made sense, then waited while staff inspected the empty room. Deputy Mark Oden, 41, flew in from Kotzebue to assist troopers with a grid search once a formal report was filed. He interviewed White, the taxi driver, and a maintenance worker who remembered helping Kerr carry a small pump to the curb. Oden later described the man as methodical and polite, with a list on notebook paper and a preference for working alone. He also noted conflicting accounts of departure time and load weight, details which investigators never reconciled despite repeated calls and follow-up visits. A team walked the ridge north of town and found shovel marks, a cleared path through dwarf willow, and boot prints with broad, shallow tread. The prints crossed a frost scar, skirted a hollow with pooled meltwater, and paused near a rust-stained boulder shaped like a wedge. A torn glove finger lay beside small pebbles sorted into a checkered sample tray, arranged as if awaiting a short return. Beyond that point, the ground turned hard, mixed with stones polished by freeze and thaw, and the pattern thinned into scuffs. Searchers followed a faint line downslope where wind had planed the surface smooth and left only darker grit between sparse lichens. A wide arc of boot marks then reappeared beside a patched tarp weighted with rocks, with cup rings and a foil packet lying nearby. Troopers collected the items and photographed a shallow trench with damp sides that suggested recent work before weather closed again. Investigators never confirmed whether the trench held any payable material, since it had partly slumped and pooled under the light rain. Reports from that week document 3 helicopter passes and 2 dog teams that worked in widening circles along gullies cut by melt streams. One handler mentioned scented trace near an abandoned culvert where snow lingered beneath brush despite warm air and steady coastal light. Another handler disagreed and wrote that the dogs were reacting to old human routes left by hikers and berry pickers in previous seasons. Records conflict over how long the team stayed in the highest zone, since fog reportedly rolled over the ridge each afternoon. Back in town, Odin checked cameras along Front Street and a service station where Kerr had bought coffee and fuel in a plastic can. Footage shows him scanning a folded map, speaking briefly with a fisherman, and noting something on a receipt before stepping into the parking lot. The fisherman later recalled a curious question about river levels and an interest in outflow timing when coastal winds pushed against freshwater. Investigators never confirmed whether that conversation influenced Kerr's route choice, though the creek mouth was not part of the official grid. A second search concentrated on drainage cuts south of the ridge where meltwater gathered in shallow slots that deepened toward muskeg and scattered pools. Volunteer notes describe thin ice inside shaded pockets, boot sinking to ankle depth, and a rhythmic clink from stones shifting underfoot. One volunteer reportedly found a strip of duct tape with a partial thumbprint that matched nothing in available files. Another found a snack wrapper that matched lodge vending stock, though state records say the batch code was common in several towns. As days passed, a working theory formed that Kerr may have backtracked unseen and taken a lower traverse when fog reduced visibility. That idea fit with the arc-shaped prints and the trench location, as if he wanted to reach his tarp without climbing again. It did not explain the missing pump, the radio, or the hose, which should have been bulky enough to impede movement. Investigators never confirmed whether a second cache existed farther down the slope, despite repeated sweeps and systematic probing of shallow depressions. A guide who knew the hill said a snow machine trail sometimes hardened into a deceptive ribbon that drew walkers toward an older cut. Some locals claimed that cut ended abruptly at a short headwall where loose gravel slid under light steps and carried people sideways. The guide's statement appears in archived notes, along with a sketch of the headwall and an arrow pointing toward a low bench. Records conflict on whether that bench was searched with poles or only scanned from above while fog drifted through the notch. Dispatch logs capture a week of calls from relatives and coworkers who described Kerr as steady, frugal, and rarely prone to risk. A union steward from Fairbanks said he never drank on shift and disliked crowds, preferring quiet cabins where he could read old manuals. A former foreman reportedly remembered a habit of marking bolts with lacquer to track vibration and a pocket notebook filled with measurements. None of those details offered a clear reason for a wrong step, a sudden detour, or a decision to leave equipment behind. During a final sweep, searchers found a shallow imprint shaped like a knee beside a tangle of willow pulled up by the roots. A few inches away, a smear of damp soil crossed a rock face and ended in grains pressed into a pattern like fabric. Photographs show no blood and no obvious shoe print, only disturbed grit and a thread that matched the torn glove finger. Investigators never confirmed whether the marks indicated a stumble, since wind picked up overnight and sanded the surface into a uniform crust. In late summer, the case file grew thin as weather improved and seasonal crews rotated home, leaving notes and maps in labeled folders. A short memorandum proposes that Kerr intended to sample at 3 points along a side channel where the creek bent around a low rise. Another memorandum argues he likely aimed for the mouth to watch conditions during a falling tide that could concentrate heavier grains near cobble bars. Records conflict on estimated timeframes, since the taxi drop was imprecise and cloud patterns disrupted any meaningful shadow analysis. White kept a copy of the missing poster taped near the keyboard and wrote dates beside calls that asked the same questions. She reportedly told a visiting brother that the room stayed quiet for weeks, though the alley sometimes carried diesel scent after midnight. Her notebook ends with a line about returning a deposit and boxing 3 shirts for storage behind the desk with other unclaimed items. Investigators never confirmed whether a family member retrieved the box, since shipping records list only a surname and illegible initials. In autumn, a hunter spotted a rectangle of blue fabric near frost, stunted spruce, and radioed coordinates before weather closed again over the hills. A team hiked the bearing and found only a faded tarp shard, a snapped grommet, and marks from fox tracks in soft ground. The shard color matched, nothing cataloged in evidence, and the grommet style differed from the tarp photographed at the trench site. State records list that lead as inconclusive and recommend renewed searches when spring snow recedes and the ground unlocks along the gullies. Years later, the ridge still draws walkers on long evenings when the light stretches and the sea reflects a dull metallic band. Some locals claimed the miner's cache lies near an old drift where meltwater vanishes into gravel and reappears below a low natural sill. Others point toward the head wall and say the bench gave way in thaw, swallowing a footprint and smoothing everything into wind-polished stone. Investigators never confirmed any of those theories, and the county file from 2009 remains a caution about incomplete ground. The story ends without resolution beyond the paper trail, a set of maps, and careful handwriting that measured days and minor purchases. Dispatch logs, state records, and archived notes describe a quiet man who planned small tasks and walked uphill before fog settled again. The ridge faces the sea and the town lights, and its gravel shifts each season when freeze and thaw pull stones apart. Kerr's name remains on a page that lodges between tabs, and the ridge keeps its distances when the wind crosses gently. The teacher missing from Cold Springs Elementary. Parents in Placerville still mention a teacher who left her classroom keys on the desk, stepped into the breezeway, and vanished. The building sits north of Main Street, where the oak trees break the summer wind and buses idle near the loop. Afternoon bell lines faded under traffic noise, while a janitor rolled a static scarred cart toward the multipurpose room. No one noticed anything unusual until the office printer kept spitting forms long after the halls went quiet. Her name in district rosters is Janine Clark, 34, fifth grade teacher, in town to finish a contracted year. She rented a small studio south of Broadway, reportedly quiet, and kept a habit of walking to work before sunup. Colleagues described careful lesson plans stacked by week and a folded cardigan tucked inside a drawer near the class library. County file from 2009 shows a previous placement in Humboldt County with satisfactory notes and no disciplinary flags. On a warm Thursday in late May of 2019, the office clock read 3:20 when dismissal wrapped. Several students returned for forgotten lunchboxes, one parent asked about reading logs, and buses pulled away. Janine signed the dismissal sheet, placed 2 graded packets in a labeled bin, and told the secretary she would lock up. Dispatch logs later noted a routine call about a stalled sedan on Placerville Drive, unrelated, around the same window. The custodian that week was Arthur Mendez, 57. Night shift, on site to prep the gym for a community meeting. He said he saw Janine cross the breezeway with a manila folder under one arm, moving toward the staff room. He remembered a quick wave and a half smile, nothing hurried, and a quiet hallway where the trophy case hummed. His statement says he kept mopping by the south doors until the wax turned even and the clock hit 4. At 4:15, according to archive notes kept by the principal, a substitute teacher named Erin stopped by the copier. She noticed the machine running with no one nearby, pages in neat stacks, and a sticky note asking to refill paper. The sticky note showed Janine's looping script, though investigators never confirmed the note's exact time because the ink bled slightly. Erin said she refilled the tray, gathered the stacks, and left them on the counter under a laminated safety poster. State records show the district uses a keycard system that logs exterior entries, though interior movement remains untracked. The card assigned to Janine recorded entry at 6:51 that morning, and no exit swipe appears that afternoon. Investigators cautioned that propped doors near the breezeway could bypass the system, and some locals claimed staff sometimes did that. Maintenance logs mention hinge repairs on the east exit, possibly encouraging the practice when the wind pressed hard against the frame. A parent volunteer named Samuel Wright, 41, delivery driver, on site to stack donated books, offered a different recollection. He carried 2 boxes toward the library when he heard a short conversation from the staff room that he could not parse. He saw a figure in a blue jacket by the vending machine, not a teacher he recognized, facing the window. He did not see Janine, and he reported the detail only after reading a notice requesting timelines the following Monday. Investigators mapped movements on a campus diagram printed from county archives using colored pins to mark estimated positions and times. The staff room window faces a small garden where students grow tomatoes, and a service gate opens toward the back lot. Security cameras cover the front entrance and the bus loop, leaving the service gate and breezeway without recording. Some locals claimed a camera once watched the breezeway, though budget minutes do not confirm any equipment there during that year. Janine's sedan remained in the parking row closest to the flagpole when deputies arrived around 7 after a delayed call. She kept a reusable water bottle in the cup holder and a spiral notebook on the passenger seat with math notes. The engine was cold and the windows were cracked a finger width, which is common when classrooms run warm in May. A small tote in the back seat contained graded essays bundled with twine and a paper marked for revision. Her phone pinged the tower near Bedford Avenue until 4:27, then showed no further activity that day. A records technician later explained that coverage drops inside certain parts of the building, especially near the inner hall. Investigators never confirmed whether the device powered down or lost battery because the handset was not recovered. The district retains a bring-your-own-device policy, which complicates retrieval of carrier details without a separate order. County file from 2009 includes an older missing person from the same district, though the circumstances differ widely. That case involved a grounds worker who left during a winter storm and returned 2 days later without explanation. Some locals claimed a pattern, but the sheriff publicly said the comparison did not hold and records conflict on timing. The archived notes from that earlier incident emphasize exhausted staffing and slow road clearance rather than campus conditions. A neighbor at Janine's complex told deputies she heard footsteps outside the unit around 5:45 that morning. She described keys clinking and a short cough, which matches a routine Janine mentioned at a staff wellness meeting. The neighbor did not see anyone that afternoon, and she thought Janine would attend a training on the following day. That training appears in district calendars, location marked as the county office, which aligns with emails recovered from the principal's account. A week later, search teams walked the trails behind the school where oak leaves gather in dry gullies. They checked culverts near the water district fence and traced the drainage channel that runs toward the old railroad grade. Cadaver dogs alerted once near a cluster of trash cans, then lost interest, which handlers later described as inconsistent. Investigators never confirmed that alert because wind and heat had shifted and the cans had been emptied earlier that morning. Friends from her previous post in Humboldt County described a cautious person who favored steady routines over last-minute plans. She called her mother on Sundays, kept receipts in envelopes by month, and logged miles for tax records with tidy lines. In Placerville, she reportedly joined a small literacy group that met near Cedar Ravine on alternating Thursdays for practice tutoring. Attendance sheets show 3 meetings in April and early May, and her name appears on each page in neat print. The principal told investigators that budget season pulled staff into long hours and multiple hiring files stacked on her desk. She said she spoke briefly with Janine about a special education referral, and she promised to follow up by email. That email exists in the server archive, timestamped 1:12, with a short reply from Janine at 1:14. The reply references a student name that is redacted in released records, which limits independent confirmation of the context. Several community members recalled seeing a white pickup near the service gate at approximately 4, parked crooked with no emblem. A grounds crew worker said the truck belonged to a vendor who repaired drinking fountains, though the schedule lists no visit. Investigators never confirmed the plate because the gate camera did not exist, and statements vary on the exact bumper stickers. Some locals claimed they saw a ladder in the bed, while others remembered a cooler and a tangle of rope. The custodian Arthur later clarified that he locked the East Hall at 4:30, then walked toward the dumpsters. He said the sky had turned pale with high cirrus, and the gym smelled like fresh varnish from the morning coat. He rolled the empty cart past the staff room and noticed a chair pulled out, a half banana, and a humming refrigerator. He did not see the manila folder, and he could not say whether the copier stacks had been moved inside. Family interviews indicate Janine planned a weekend trip to Auburn to see an old roommate, who waited at a cafe. The roommate sent a message at 6, then another at 7, and assumed traffic had slowed the drive. When no reply came by 9, she called the district number on the website and reached voicemail. She filed a welfare check request, which appears in dispatch logs at 9:23, triggering the evening response to the campus. A teacher from a neighboring classroom said she found a sticky note under a stapler on the following morning. The note read that a parent conference needed rescheduling after a sibling pickup issue, and the signature looked like Janine's line. Investigators never confirmed whether the note was written that day or earlier in the week, and light smudges complicated analysis. The pen used matched office stock pens that many staff share, which limited any useful tracing of ink purchase records. A local who walks dogs near the fence line reported hearing a short whistle from the garden area around 4:10. He thought it was a child imitating a bird and did not approach the gate, which often sticks near the latch. He later wondered if it signaled someone, though investigators cautioned against building narratives from faint memory. His statement was filed, and the report notes residual mower noise from a neighbor's yard that could mimic a whistle. State records confirm that Janine held a valid credential, and her evaluations listed steady classroom management with consistent routines. Her attendance from January through May showed 2 personal days for dental work and 1 sick day after a winter cold. Payroll noted a pending stipend for after-school tutoring, which had not yet been issued when the year closed. None of those items suggested sudden resignation, and investigators emphasized that employment indicators can mislead when other pressures build quietly. During summer, crews replaced the east exit hinges and repainted the breezeway where varnish had peeled under repeated heat. A maintenance supervisor said the project had been scheduled earlier and supplies were ordered before the school year ended. Some locals claimed the timing erased scuffs that might matter, though county guidelines require routine upkeep before fall. Investigators never confirmed whether any scuff carried evidentiary value, and photos in the file show only generalized wear. In September of that year, hikers reported a neatly folded cardigan near a turnout on Mosquito Road beyond the river. Deputies collected it and noted size and label, which aligned with a brand Janine favored in photos from field trips. The cardigan carried no traceable tag to the store, and rain had passed, which softened any residue on the fabric. The lab report listed indeterminate results, and records conflict on whether the color matched one seen in her classroom drawer. A tip line produced calls about a blue jacket figure seen near the staff room, but descriptions varied by height. One caller remembered a limp, another mentioned a ball cap, and a third thought the zipper shone under fluorescent light. Investigators compared the accounts, and they never confirmed whether those details refer to a single person or several passers-by. The vending machine vendor list showed restock on Tuesday, not Thursday, which complicates assumptions about who lingered in that corner. As the year turned, the district reassigned the classroom and boxed the remaining supplies for storage in a locked cage. A new teacher unpacked the math notebooks after winter break and found a roster with penciled updates beside surnames. The updates matched Janine's handwriting according to a reading specialist who trained with her, though the date line is blank. The specialist gave a statement that she last saw Janine at lunchtime on Thursday, standing by the copy room doorway. A brief item ran in the local paper referencing a missing teacher, and it led with courteous language about community support. The article cited the sheriff and the principal with spare quotes, and it named the school without giving the address. Comments online drifted toward speculation about roadways and footpaths, which investigators discourage when maps can mislead. That caution appears in archived notes from early briefings, and the phrasing repeats across updates released over the next months. By spring of the next year, the case summary condensed into a timeline that begins with the morning entry swipe. It lists classroom activities through dismissal, notes the copier running, places Arthur in the South Hall, and places Samuel near the library. It marks the unverified blue jacket sighting, the unlogged service gate area, and the sedan parked by the flagpole when dusk settled. Then the line ends with the phone ping drop and a blank field where investigators wrote pending until further leads arise. Some locals claimed they saw her hiking on weekends near Cronin Ranch, yet trail cameras never placed her there. Others believed a rideshare picked her up near the loop, but state records show no relevant trips in that time. Theories about staff conflicts appear in informal threads, and investigators never confirmed any disputes that fit the timeline. The available documents lean toward quiet routine turning into absence, and the file holds that shape without stating a cause. The district still keeps her name in older newsletters stored on a public folder that parents browse during enrollment. There are photos of book fairs and science night tables, and in one image, she adjusts a poster while students grin. None of the images show unusual visitors, and timestamps land months before late May, which narrows their significance. The folder remains a reference point for volunteers who remember that spring and for families who ask about the old garden. The classroom has new posters now, and the breezeway smells like wax again when summer arrives and heat rises. Children run toward buses, teachers wave with clipboards, and the office printer chugs through permission slips that stack on the counter. A sign near the garden asks people to keep the gate closed, though the latch still feels loose on windy afternoons. The story remains mostly paper and recollection, anchored by dispatch logs and sober lines that leave the ending open. The stories. Paramedic who kept the final snapshot from triage. The last photo on Kira Voss's work phone was never supposed to survive the software pilot. It stayed anyway after the server hiccup. Kira was 34, a city paramedic who liked quiet late calls and neat paperwork. She started that Tuesday on basic supply checks and light banter. Her goal sounded simple in her head. Finish a 10-hour shift without a single upgrade, then get home before midnight for leftover curry. The call that changed the night came from a roadside motel behind a car wash. Dispatch logged an unresponsive male, unknown age, possible overdose. She and her partner, Mateo Lark, rolled in with lights low and voices steady. Room 12 smelled like cleaner and stale heat from the wall unit. A thin man lay sideways between the bed and a chair, breathing shallow and quick. No wallet in sight. A cracked phone blinking a silent screen. Kira saw a visitor sticker stuck to his hoodie pocket. The date line was smudged, but the background color looked like a clinic pass. They bagged him for a minute to settle his breathing. A half-full paper cup sat by the sink, ice melted into a flat circle of water. Vital signs were jumpy, but not crashing. He opened his eyes once and said a short word that sounded like Riley. Then he slipped under again. They moved fast to the medical center near the river. The radio reported a separate pileup north, which meant triage would be crowded and loud. The hospital had been piloting an electronic intake tool all month. It asked for a quick face photo to match a barcode before the wristband print. The intake line was 3 deep when they arrived. A nurse pushed the cart forward, the printer chattered, everyone talked clipped and fast on instinct. Kira snapped the photo at the kiosk because the app flashed a warning. Upload pending, network unstable. She kept his hoodie on because he shook. The man landed in a monitored bay by the doors. A resident named Bryn Ketter called for labs and a gentle drip. The resident squinted at the chart. Kira wrote her run sheet near the sink. She noted the visitor sticker and the motel room number, and she logged the time from the wall clock. Security cut a small plastic bag from the man's waist string. The bag held a folded laundromat card, a bent key, $3, and a receipt. A second surge of ambulances flooded triage with crash patients. Yellow tags and green tags pressed into the hallway. Voices layered into a dense cloud. In the noise, someone swapped beds to clear space. The man with the hoodie slid one bay over, and a crash patient took his place under a portable lamp. Kira and Mateo finished their handoff after an hour. The man seemed stable. They cleaned the stretcher rails, signed the tablet, and walked toward the exit. The code alarm sounded from the bay they had left. Kira swiveled in the doorway and saw movement through bodies. Someone called for epinephrine with a clipped tone. She stood still without getting in the way. The team pushed and counted and charted. The monitor flattened once, then kicked back, then flatlined again while staff switched roles. Kira did not like leaving after a loss. She did what protocol allows. She tapped Mateo's arm. Then they cleared the doorway and stepped into the humid night. Back at the station, reports stacked up behind them. An hour later, an internal message flagged her run. The patient from the motel did not make it. The summary blamed an unknown allergy aggravated by a blood pressure medication. It suggested the crew had no information at scene and that intake documentation was incomplete. Kira read that line twice. She remembered scratching on his left palm, faint letters smudged by sweat and cleaner. She also remembered the sticker on the hoodie pocket. She opened her notes app and zoomed on a quick photo of the motel nightstand. A corner of the visitor sticker showed a logo like a lighthouse beacon. Her phone buzzed again with a request from quality assurance. Please confirm the scene contained no allergy indications. Please confirm no wallet or tags were found. Kira typed careful answers. She wrote that the scene had no formal bracelet, but there was writing on skin and a clinic sticker with a dateline. She could hear Mateo in the next room telling a joke about stale granola bars. She closed her eyes, pictured the kiosk light, and remembered the app freeze. She opened the work app and saw the pending icon. The photo from triage had sat in the queue since that busy hour. It should have deleted itself. She saved a copy to the secure folder because the pilot sometimes ate evidence. Officers who handle accident scenes had warned crews to keep their own digital trail. In the photo, the man stared past the kiosk, eyes unfocused, mouth clenched. The shot was crisp enough to read small print on the edge of his hoodie. She leaned toward the phone and read the visitor sticker again. The shape matched a clinic 2 miles north. The color matched last week's series on their site. She noticed something else that bothered her. The wristband in the photo was already on his right wrist, and the printed name was not Riley or unknown. The name read Colin Hart with a birth year that was wrong by 2 decades. The band also carried a room assignment for a different wing upstairs. Kira checked the run sheet and confirmed the time on the photo. It was taken before he left intake, with a clock in the frame above the desk. She balanced possibilities in her head. Either the band printer reused a label by accident, or triage grabbed a band intended for someone from the crash. She called the station supervisor and spoke in a flat voice. She also saved the app log and the photo metadata. She wanted a clean chain if asked. The supervisor told her to hold steady. He said quality would reach out by morning and that she should write her memory within the next hour. Kira wrote about the motel room, the visitor sticker, the palm writing, and the switch between bays during the crash surge. She avoided guesses and listed times. By sunrise, the hospital asked to speak with her. A comm coordinator named Lauren Pike scheduled a meeting in a small office near the loading dock. Loren listened without interruption while Kira laid out the sequence. He wrote down the kiosk freeze, the wrong name on the band, and the sticker details. "Do you have the photo?" he asked plainly. Kira nodded once and slid her phone forward. Loren studied the image like a puzzle that did not want solving. He asked for permission to copy the file into their incident folder. Kira agreed and asked for a printed receipt of transfer. Lauren printed one with a timestamp. Later that day, security pulled camera clips around intake and the hallway. Audio is thin in those clips, but timestamps line up with dispatch logs from that hour. A volunteer recalled bumping the band cart while pushing crash supplies. The cart carried 2 stacks from different printers. A stack fell and another stack landed on top. A nurse remembered seeing a resident hand off a half-printed band to clear paper jams. Everyone meant well, and the hallway demanded corners get rounded to save seconds. The wrong band landed on the wrong wrist during the shuffle. The allergy field below the name read none, and the medication plan followed that value at speed. The palm writing found in the photo said lisinopril with a shaky loop on the L. That writing matched a pharmacy warning card found later in the discarded bag. The path to his name was still unsolved. The wrong band had masked his identity, and the motel room registry carried a fake first name paid in cash. Kira and Mateo stopped by the motel between calls and spoke to the clerk. The clerk remembered the man because he had asked for late checkout and offered a 10. The clerk described a quiet talker with a careful way of folding receipts. He said the man asked if the clinic across the highway took walk-ins on Sundays. Kira asked if he had left anything behind. The clerk pulled a small envelope from under the counter and handed it over. Inside was a second laundromat card. The card carried the same punched pattern as the one from his bag. A faded stamp showed a cartoon lighthouse that matched the clinic logo from the sticker. Kira wrote the clinic name into her notes and searched internal contacts for a social worker who knew someone there. Network rules can sometimes solve what computers cannot. By evening, a social worker faxed a staff list with a first name that matched the word Riley from the ambulance. A receptionist there recalled a cousin who visited often. The cousin lived near the rail tracks and had shared rides with a man named Rail Hinton. That name pulled a match from the clinic immunization folder with a phone number. The number reached a sister on the third ring. She had been calling hospitals all day without luck. She cried once, then steadied, and asked for straight answers. Kira gave the sister the number for Loren and the case coordinator. She explained that the hospital would confirm identity through records, and that she would share what she could. The sister described Rael as a careful man who wrote allergy reminders on his hand while saving for new glasses. She said he kept every receipt because he lost a wallet once. She also said he used visitor stickers as bookmarks. He picked them from clinic bowls like candy, because ink on paper made him feel less small. The hospital identified him formally by evening, using clinic records and a dental chart from an old file. The visitor sticker linked the timeline to a specific morning. The report shifted. Instead of blaming a vague, unknown allergy, the document focused on a band cart process and a printer override protocol during surge conditions. Quality assurance asked to keep Kira's photo, which showed the wrong band before bedside orders fired. Her pending upload had turned into an anchor for the timeline. Loren thanked her in a quiet hallway near the vending machines. He said the photo mattered because it caught a small truth at the exact right second. He also said the hospital planned a training session with a new rule. Wristbands would be applied only after a complete scan and a spoken name confirmation. Kira asked about the visitor sticker and the laundromat card. Loren said the family had seen those items and that they were grateful for the detail and care. There was a final meeting about the phrase kept photo, because the tool policy warned against storing faces. Loren documented the server failure and the pending icon. He wrote that the photo had been preserved to support timely reporting during a pilot outage. He signed the form with a date and left a copy in her file. Mateo teased her gently about her habit of triple-saving things. He said she was a walking archive with a neat ponytail and an allergic reaction to loose ends. She laughed, then stood quiet for a breath. She thought about the palm writing and how small a warning can look when a hallway feels crowded. Weeks later, a new kiosk arrived with better network checks. The printer trays carried bold labels, and volunteers learned to stop and verify whenever carts bumped. Kira kept a printed run sheet from that night in her desk. The sheet had her small notes about the lighthouse sticker and the ice in the cup. An instructor asked her to teach one class for new hires. She told them about the photo and the band, and the way tiny signals can vanish under noise. A student asked how she remembered so much. She said she wrote on index cards, and she made little recordings after calls while the radio was still warm. The sister sent a letter with a simple line. "Thank you for noticing the sticker." It made the phone call shorter, and it made the goodbye kinder. Kira folded the letter into the run sheet and closed the drawer. She washed her coffee cup, then walked outside to breathe the late shift air. The city sounded like a distant fan that needed oil. She wondered how many small warnings slide past each night because nobody has a free hand to catch them. She knew the photo would fade into policy and training slides. She also knew that a single clear frame can hold a hallway steady when clocks feel slippery. On quiet nights, she drives past the motel on her way home. The neon still flickers, and the car wash still hums across the frozen curb. She thinks about the visitor sticker and the lighthouse logo. She thinks about the wrong name on a band and the right name in a folder miles away. She is not someone who keeps trophies from hard calls. She kept that one photo long enough to send it to the right folder with a receipt. The fact that it stayed during a glitch felt like the kind of accident that refuses to be ignored. It asked for someone to slow down. Her work is not a string of heroic saves. It is a long practice of noticing small, true things before they slip beneath a wave of noise. The photo taught her something she already knew. Details are not decorations, and time is never a blur when someone chooses to write things down. The story ends without fireworks because that is how most true stories end. A hallway returns to normal, and a system gets a little less clumsy. Kira drives home with the window cracked and a song on low volume. She knows nothing can make the loss tidy, but clarity still matters. She unlocks her door, drops her bag, and checks her phone for one last message. The queue is empty, and the app finally reads, "Upload complete." She smiles once without any triumph, then she turns off the light and lets the day settle, while the city hums and the clock keeps moving. The Bridge Creek drowning that wasn't recorded. Locals in Deschutes County still mention a cold evening on Bridge Creek when a man vanished without an official entry. Witnesses later argued over the hour and the light while the water ran clear and slow beneath alder shade. The only certainty, according to archived notes kept in Bend, was that the call for help never landed where it should. The gap in paperwork turned an ordinary search into a puzzle that keeps reappearing in winter conversations. The man most often named was Trent Avery, 42, contract carpenter, in the area to price repairs on a seasonal cabin. He reportedly arrived 2 days earlier and slept in his truck near Sisters to save money, according to a motel clerk. The cabin owner said he never signed in or asked for a key because daylight was already fading near the ridge. The owner told deputies he expected a text that never came, which is a detail that repeats across later statements. Avery met one person that afternoon, a fisheries tech named Mara Collins, 34, state employee, checking culvert screens along a Forest Service spur. She said the creek looked safe for a crossing at the ford, which remained shallow where gravel spread across 2 tire lanes. Her state records log for that date lists water clarity as good and current speed as moderate with no debris above the culvert. She remembered a white cooler in his truck bed and a neatly folded jacket on the passenger seat. Dispatch logs from that week show wildfire smoke along the highway and intermittent tower issues between Sisters and Camp Sherman. A technician wrote that calls sometimes hopped east before returning, which could explain later confusion over which county heard the first report. A private tower contractor filed a brief noting brief resets during the evening hour when shadows lengthened across the creek. The record is not a smoking gun, but it sits near the time window witnesses describe. Collins said she left him near 5 while the light still held, and the ford looked routine for any cautious driver. She told investigators he waved and asked about the old bridge pilings that stick from the bank near the bend. She reportedly replied that the pilings belonged to a logging ramp that washed out when storms changed the channel 2 winters back. She did not recall him stepping into the water or walking the gravel bar to test the footing. State records list a cloud front moving in from the northwest with cooler air that sometimes makes breath show at dusk. A ranger out of Sisters wrote that the creek often looks tame until a beaver dam upstream lets a pulse slide through. That can raise water a few inches quickly, which becomes meaningful in a narrow crossing where tires already press wet stones. The ranger did not say this happened that night, only that such pulses occur without sound along that reach. The first missing person alert does not exist in the county file from 2009, though later forms reference an original call. One deputy said the form might have been faxed to a non-emergency line that stopped accepting overnight traffic. Another deputy thought a visitor probably dialed from near the highway and hit the wrong jurisdiction due to the tower skip. The absence of a timestamp feeds the theory that information arrived in pieces and never landed in a single folder. 2 anglers claimed they saw a dome light blinking near the ford sometime after dark while the truck sat angled to the bank. They argued about whether the engine idled or whether they only heard water sliding against stones under the alders. Some locals claimed a third person approached the scene on a bicycle and left without speaking, though investigators never confirmed such a rider. Their statements match on the dome light detail and diverge on almost every other point. Avery's sister later provided archived notes from his phone bills that show attempts to call a Bend number around 8. The number belongs to the cabin owner who had already driven home to Redmond and silenced his ringer above the garage. Records conflict on whether a voicemail ever arrived because the carrier log shows activity while the device log shows only a missed call. The discrepancy is small yet meaningful when trying to place a voice in a narrow hour along the creek. Searchers walked both banks at first light and found boot tracks that entered from the gravel bar and faded where cobble turned firm. A tape measure in a photograph shows a stride that stays even then shortens near a shallow channel cut by the previous week rain. They recovered the white cooler 50 yards downstream, caught against willow roots, with the lid unlatched but nothing inside. The jacket remained on the passenger seat exactly as Collins described, which adds a quiet weight to her timeline. A retired deputy who reviews Coldfield files said the map grid for the initial sweep sits one square too far east. He blamed a habit of copying last season templates during busy weeks and missing small shifts in volunteer practice. That oversight pushes a key waypoint off the creek, which could explain why a thermal search missed a figure in the brush. He did not frame this as proof that someone waited there, only that the error changed where people looked first. In later interviews, a hardware clerk in Sisters remembered Avery buying a short toe strap and a shovel with a fiberglass handle. The clerk thought he mentioned a soft approach near a ford where ruts filled and needed a few minutes with a blade. The receipt time lines up with Collins and the ranger notes, which places him near the creek before dusk with reasonable tools. The purchase does not prove a crossing attempt, yet it keeps the possibility within a narrow band of motives. A volunteer firefighter described a call that almost arrived, a carrier ping that appears in a phone report but not in dispatch logs. He said the station door was open for inventory and the tone speakers clicked once without the usual follow message. He wrote his memory down years later for a training handout, which makes it more story than record. Still, several younger volunteers say they heard similar clicks during that month when the tower resets annoyed crews. Divers checked a pool downstream where the channel tightens and lifts small whirl lines against a rock rib under the bank. Visibility stayed poor due to fine silt stirred by a mid-morning wind and a brief flow rise from upstream wetlands. They found no clothing or wallet and no keys, which matches the detail that the truck cab stayed unlocked at the scene. The diver lead said the bottom felt mostly smooth with scattered roots that would have caught a heavy object easily. Weeks later, a property survey crew flagged a scrap of fabric trapped on barbed wire near a floodplain meadow. The piece looked like work pant material and carried fine silt that stains in the specific way Bridge Creek water does. A lab in Salem could not confirm much beyond weave and color range, which overlaps with common brands used by local contractors. The finding neither closes the case nor clears any doubts about the unrecorded call that started the confusion. Avery's truck eventually left the impound lot and returned to family after a modest court order that resolved a storage dispute. The odometer reading suggested little movement beyond the approach and the short angle found by deputies at first light. Tire pressure on the right front ran low enough to pull a light vehicle toward the wet edge during a cautious attempt. A mechanic said that detail matters only if a driver felt rushed and chose not to air up before crossing. Some residents claimed he might have walked out before midnight after losing patience with the patchy calls and weak signal near the ford. Others said a car picked him up on the highway and drove north toward Warm Springs, a route that thins quickly after dark. Investigators never confirmed either thread because camera coverage along that stretch remains limited and cash purchases leave quiet trails. The two stories survive because neither collides with the evidence found by the creek. Years after the search, a regional auditor reviewed communications procedures and noted that inter-county coordination improved during the next season. The report mentions additional training with tower vendors and a shared checklist when pings show cross-jurisdiction drift for emergency calls. None of that resolves where Avery went, yet it addresses the blank square where his first alert should have lived. The lesson sits quietly in meeting minutes while the creek keeps moving stones along the shallows. The file remains open in a narrow sense with periodic review when new hikers report odd finds in willow tangles after spring runoff. Most of those reports fade after a deputy drives out and looks where grass has already leaned and lifted again. The absence of a recovered body keeps speculation tethered to polite voices in diners near the highway and the mill. The story persists because the paperwork gap made a simple night on a small creek feel like an argument that never ends. The stories. The silent hospital wing with alleged final footage. The north wing stayed quiet after visiting hours, and the only noise came from vents that clicked like tired metronomes. Staff shared the same phrase for years, reportedly calling it the silent hallway where the lights hummed slightly brighter. Mara Kincaid was 34, and she worked nights as a charge nurse who still wrote notes by hand. She liked predictable rounds, and she liked checking the machines herself because she trusted beeps less than faces. On a rainy Thursday, her simple goal was to finish a wound check, sign a stack of orders, and clock out. The shift began with a late dinner in the break room, and it seemed like the kind of night nothing remembers. Ronan Vale was 36, and he supervised maintenance with a patience that came from old factory work. He carried a pocket radio with a broken antenna, and he logged every outlet test like it mattered to someone. The incident started when a patient in the north wing pressed his call button, then silence followed without any voice reply. The archived call log showed the button was held for 5 seconds, then released, then tapped again 3 times. Mara reached the door first, and she cleared her throat before pushing with her shoulder, since the latch stuck on humid nights. The room was empty, and the bed rails were up, and the bathroom light was on without any water running. She checked the hallway camera by the nurse's station, and the feed had frozen on a frame where no one stood. Ronan arrived with a service cart, and he frowned, and he asked if anyone had patched the camera since last quarter. "Patient transfer, maybe," Mara said, and she kept her voice low because the corridor carried everything. "I never got a page about a transport." Ronan pulled the maintenance binder, and he pointed at an entry from 2019 that mentioned a power fluctuation. "Different camera," he said, and his thumb tapped the page like a small hammer, finishing an obvious nail. They checked the bed chart, and the name line only held initials, because the unit had privacy rules for sensitive admissions. The time of admission was listed as 2200, and the diagnosis read observation, and nothing else was printed. A housekeeper named Iola Reyes rolled a linen hamper by them, and she said the patient asked earlier about the stairwell. Witness statements later noted she had not seen a badge on the patient wrist, and she remembered the smell of antiseptic. Mara searched the bathroom, and she counted 5 cotton swabs in the trash, along with 2 adhesive tabs that had curled. She took a photo with the hospital phone, and the flash startled her because she had forgotten to disable the shutter sound. Ronan opened the ceiling tile by the door, and he peered at the cable run that fed the camera and the smoke sensor. He found a hairline crack in the conduit, and a tiny curl of metal shaving rested on the tile like a silver thread. They followed policy, and they called security, and a guard named Derry Boone wrote the time on his palm with a marker. His radio squawked, and dispatch logs later captured the clipped exchange that said North Wing camera frozen since 2215. The investigation moved across small squares of evidence, and every piece felt ordinary until each piece started fitting. Mara pulled prior vitals from the network, and the last reading on that room was normal. Then the device stopped sending updates. Ronan replayed earlier camera clips from other angles, and he found 5 seconds where the emergency exit alert blinked. Witness statements reported no alarm sounded on the floor, which suggested a silenced switch or a failed buzzer behind the plate. They visited the stairwell, and it smelled like wet concrete, and there were footprints that pulled dirt up in little arches. The toe pattern looked like patient socks, and a scuff line dragged for a foot, then stopped, and then resumed. Iola walked the corridor with them, and she rested her hands on the hamper edges like it was a steering wheel. He asked if the vending machine ever takes bills this late, she said, and her tone was apologetic without a reason. Mara checked the cafeteria camera archive, and she searched timestamps between 2200 and 2230 without breaks. The footage showed vending lights flicker and a rolling reflection of the ice machine door, and no patient approached either. Ronan called the on-call electrician, and he asked for a line test on the north wing circuits beyond the junction. The electrician reportedly answered from a truck outside, and he said storms cause weird ghosts when the backup inverter handshakes incorrectly. Security reviewed vehicle gates, and the record showed no exits, and it showed 1 ambulance arrival and 1 taxi inbound turn. The taxi camera caught rain on the lens, and the shapes in the frame appeared like shadows pretending to be people moving. Mara walked back to the room, and she sat in the visitor chair, and she looked at the bed like a stage. The sheets held a diagonal crease that suggested someone sat on the edge, then changed their mind, and stood slowly. She noticed a folded paper beneath the pillow, and it was hospital stationery, and the writing was cramped and slanted. The note read, "They said, I would sleep here for observation. I only asked for quiet. I will make it quiet myself." She showed Ronan, and he raised his eyebrows, and he said, "People write strange lines when they want control again." "Could be a statement," he said. And he took a photo, and he set the paper back where it had been resting. They checked the elevator camera on the service lift, and they saw no one. And they saw the doors hesitate twice without reason. The maintenance panel log showed a fault code that matched a sticky optical sensor, which could create a false occupancy reading. Security walked the roof, and raindrops traveled in sheets, and the helicopter pad lights buzzed, and the wind pulled at the harness. No prints held on the rubber mat under that weather, and the team recorded nothing except water pooling near a drain. Mara called the number listed for the initials on the chart, and the voicemail answered with a generic greeting without a name. The archived calls showed she left a message, and she marked the record for a social worker referral the next morning. The twist arrived from a workstation that handled the wing wide overnight monitor board, which recorded short clips for training. Ronan found a separate storage folder, and he found files with timestamps that matched the frozen camera, which suggested a mirrored buffer. He played the file, and the first seconds held the empty corridor, and the lights hummed, and the vents clicked rhythmically. Then a figure stepped into frame from the bathroom, and the face stayed bowed, and the person held a small device. The figure pressed the call button, and waited, and pressed again, and then looked directly into the lens with a steady expression. The person wore a blue patient gown, and there was no bracelet, and a square of bandage covered the left forearm. The figure spoke one line, and the audio kept popping, and the words were difficult but not impossible, and they landed heavily. The line sounded like, "Please log this as a discharge without paper. I will return the quiet that was promised tonight." The figure leaned toward the hallway exit and held up a magnet key that looked improvised from a maintenance badge shell. Ronan froze the frame, and he zoomed carefully, and he compared the lanyard clip to older staff models from storage. He opened a drawer on his cart, and he pulled a shadowed badge, and the clip matched the same notched jaw. He remembered a report from 2011 that mentioned missing spares, and he realized the old inventory never reconciled fully. Mara watched the clip again, and she noticed the brief stop at the door where the hand paused near the hinge. The person shifted weight, and the gown hem lifted, and a glimpse of ankle revealed a piece of linen tied like cord. They searched the linen cart and found a torn sheet corner and a tight knot that matched the quick tie and frame. Witness statements sometimes miss small habits, and this one felt like proof that the same hands moved through every part. Security traced the stairwell door with a flashlight, and the latch plate held a line of smudged residue near the tongue. The residue smelled faintly of hand sanitizer, and the drizzle likely washed everything else, and a small rectangle mark remained. Ronan printed the frame, and he marked the hallway clock on the wall, and then drew a diagonal line. If the figure left at that angle, he reasoned, then the person would pass the decommissioned lab and the loading dock walkway. They opened the door to the old lab, and stale air settled on their shoulders, and a single emergency light hummed. A small stool sat under the wall phone, and the receiver was off, and the dispatch recorded 2 seconds of static. The loading dock camera had the clearest view, and the rain helped by shining every surface like a clean mirror. The figure emerged under the overhang, and paused, and placed the improvised badge on the scale, and stared at the red numbers. Mara said quietly that people sometimes need clocks that have nothing to do with time, and Ronan nodded without looking away. The figure moved toward the far gate, and the frame caught a truck pulling in, and the headlamps blinded the sensor briefly. The alleged final footage ended with the figure stepping beyond the painted yellow line, and the clip cut to black. The storage folder wrote a partial next file, and the timestamp advanced 1 minute, and the next image showed only rain and darkness. Security canvassed the area beyond the gate the next morning, and they found a blue paper cap in a pothole. A supermarket clerk down the road later told them privately that a person in a gown bought a jacket before sunrise. The clerk described a steady voice and a careful posture, and a request for the cheapest jacket that still had a zipper. She remembered a folded square of tape on the person's wrist, and she said the person counted bills with deliberate focus. Mara filed the incident summary, and she kept the note line without interpretation because her job was to record and proceed. She added the sentence about the linen tie, and she added the part about the magnet key, and she kept the tone steady. Ronan wrote a maintenance report that asked for a complete audit of old badge hardware and an updated inventory process. He requested a camera firmware refresh schedule, and he recommended replacing the corridor conduit that carried the vulnerable signal run. The hospital quietly changed the North Wing protocol, and now every quiet room kept a visitor log under a laminated sheet. Nurses checked the stairwell latch every round, and security scanned badge shells weekly, and housekeeping marked any torn linens. Months later, a social worker forwarded a letter to administration, and it mentioned a patient who left without signing. The message said the person had revisited, reportedly during a volunteer day, and returned the improvised badge in a sealed envelope. The letter closed with a single sentence that matched the tone of that night and felt like a bookend that fit. The person wrote, "Please remove my initials from the board. My observation ended when your hallway stopped pretending to be quiet." Mara read that line twice in silence, and she folded the paper and she placed it in the confidential binder. She stood outside the North Wing and she listened to the vents and she heard the hum as part of routine. Ronan installed the new camera and he tightened the bracket and he watched the live feed while the corridor waited. The picture captured only light and doors and floor, and that was the point, and he signed the work order neatly. Staff still tell the story in pieces, and they keep the facts close and the phrasing softer than rumors deserve. Most say the footage is final because it ends, and because endings feel like decisions, even when the person continues somewhere else. The hospital kept the clip off the training servers, and only a few supervisors can access the mirrored buffer folder. They treat it with the same caution they give to old X-rays, and they open it only when policies turn uncertain. When the night quiets, the North Wing sounds the same as any other hallway, with that hum that never quits. People who know the incident say quiet is never silence, and they say promises can be kept without anyone hearing the words. If the figure returns again, security will log the time, and maintenance will test the lines, and nursing will keep notes. The story already taught them that quiet can hide intentions, and that evidence can walk on socked feet and still register. Mara keeps working nights, and she still checks machines in person, and she still trusts faces more than recorded beeps. Ronan keeps his pocket radio, and he keeps sharpening his pencil with a knife, and he keeps circling dates on forms. They do not trade theories in the break room, because theories cannot start IVs, and they cannot prevent skipped alarms. They keep procedures updated, and they keep the story within policy, and they let the hallway be simply a hallway again. When someone new asks about the silent North Wing, staff shrug with a practiced economy that looks almost like kindness. They know quiet can be a boundary people choose, and they know cameras capture frames, and they know choices finish off screen. The hallway holds steady under the lights, and the vents click, and the doors breathe slightly as pressure shifts slowly. Whatever happened that night belongs to lines and logs and to a voice recorded over rain, asking for uncomplicated quiet. In the end, the building remembers through everyday details and people remember through work, and that is usually enough. The North Wing remains quiet, not empty, and the lesson sits on a shelf with a label that only insiders recognize. The Vanishing Crew of the Trawler Northern Star. The story begins in Kodiak during early spring, when daylight stretched thin and the wind smelled like cold iron swept clean. Locals remembered the name Northern Star painted in chipped blue along a tired hull that still rode steady. The boat left the harbor with 3 people and a full bunkroom of spares that stayed unused for reasons never explained. By dusk, the town watched her stern light fade toward Shelikoff Strait, while fog gathered over the breakwater and swallowed the last glimmer. Mark Ellis was 46 and worked as captain after 2 decades, running small cod trips from Shignik to Adak. He wanted a better price on pollock and believed the narrow weather window would hold long enough for a quick haul. Rosa Jimenez was 33 and listed as engineer who had shifted from cannery maintenance to sea wages through a winter of short contracts. Paul Chen was 29 and assigned as a state observer whose duty was sampling catches and submitting counts to a regional office in Anchorage. Their reason for leaving Kodiak that morning sounded simple in dispatch logs that recorded an intended 5-day loop along Shelikof. The crew planned to fish a proven corridor west of Raspberry Island, where past sets produced reliably before the season cooled. Harbor traffic control reportedly cleared them at 7:14 with a reminder about scattered ice near Whale Passage based on a late trawler report. A fuel receipt timestamped 7:30 showed a last purchase and a handwriting note that read, "Check aft bilge before stretch." Witness statements came from two skippers who crossed their wake near the harbor outer range and described a steady heading and calm radio. One skipper believed the engine note sounded rougher than last week, though he admitted his own wheelhouse windows rattled louder than usual. Another skipper said the deck lights flickered briefly before stabilizing, which might mean a loose alternator belt or a failing breaker. Investigators never confirmed those impressions because the sound was not recorded and the breakers were later found in mid-state. In Larsen Bay, a clerk recalled Rosa buying solvent and fresh belts 2 days earlier while asking about a gasket that never arrived. Archived notes from a parts supplier listed the order as shipped to Kodiak, with no confirmation of pickup and no return entry. State records later summarized the vessel maintenance as minimal, with deferred items stapled behind the primary license renewal form. Some locals claimed the captain preferred field fixes because haul prices barely covered crew and fuel, and long yard days meant unpaid time. On the first night, a front brushed the coast and left a ragged swell that wandered south along the strait and leaned on shoals. Barometer traces from an automated station on Sitkaladak showed a gentle fall that matched the caution shared by harbor weather later. Northern Star acknowledged the broadcast and reported position near Pillar Mountain, bearing southeast, which suggested a planned crossing toward calmer lee waters. The last clear shore-based signal placed the boat midway between Whale Island and Afognak before the line thinned and scattered. A driftnet crew from Old Harbor reportedly saw a single mast light in haze just before midnight near the shoal line off Sitkanak. They judged the vessel slow by the steady bearing and believed the boat was searching for current breaks, where fish stack in pale water. Their deckhand heard a short bell strike that did not fit their equipment and could have drifted off a distant buoy. Investigators never confirmed that sound because there were no buoys charted within the range claimed in the statement. By morning, the observer office in Anchorage expected a routine check-in from Paul that usually arrived before the first set began. When no message came, the coordinator sent a reminder through the state account that drew no response and left the status pending. At noon, the company dispatcher called Kodiak Harbor to ask whether the crew had switched to a secondary channel or locked radios. Dispatch logs show the harbor initiated an information call and listed the vessel as overdue for contact, though not yet late for arrival. The first search push launched that evening with a cutter out of Kodiak and a helo assigned to a box north of Sitkaladak. Weather was passable with long swell and scattered fog that piled into valleys and released again as the wind shifted briefly. Aircrew reported a faint oil sheen near a slack eddy and marked coordinates for surface vessels to check when the tide turned. No debris was found, and currents in that corner can erase thin sheens quickly when wind and tidal streams begin running together. A week later, a crabber turned up a torn section of netting and delivered it to the station, where technicians photographed every rope splice carefully. The material matched common trawlnet stock sold across the region and revealed no marks that uniquely identified the Northern Star purchase. County file from 2009 contained a similar case where net fragments misled a search until a dragged anchor was recovered near Spruce. Records conflict on whether that lesson was weighed during early decisions in the present case because notes omitted internal discussions. Rosa kept a small notebook and a waterproof pencil, according to friends, who said she recorded fuel draws and breaker resets meticulously. The book did not surface during searches, and the cabin photos released later showed drawers open with blankets stacked neatly across bunks. Some locals claimed neat bunks mean a crew expected a quick return to deck and left in order when noise rose suddenly. Investigators never confirmed that interpretation since the images were taken after several boardings, which can shift blankets and papers without intent. A grocery receipt from town listed coffee tins and packaged bread, and a second receipt listed non-perishable stew for 5 days at sea. The tally fit the planned window and matched the observer mandate, which limits extended voyages without updated station notices on catch counts. A third receipt was time-stamped late night with a handwritten circle around marine batteries that were marked discount for display stock. State records list no rule against using display stock if tested at purchase, and the vendor wrote passed on the form. Several radio captures surfaced weeks later from private sets that record local chatter and ship checks on rolling memory for hobby archives. One clip included a short call that some listeners heard as Northern Star starboard pump cycling, though others argued the tone belonged to a winch. The clip length was under 10 seconds and ended with a squelch that compressed the last word into a blur that felt unlike speech. Investigators never confirmed the source because the receiver used a homemade antenna that pulled reflections from hillsides and power lines. A shoreline team walking near Pazad Shack found a life ring without lettering, which suggested either weathering or paint worn by friction against gear. No marks tied it to the vessel, and the manufacturer sold identical rings to fleets from Seward to Unalaska during that year. The team logged coordinates and a note that wind and swell could drift objects ashore from far east or west, depending on timing. Dispatch logs show the item cataloged and stored, while other leads pulled searchers toward new reports that offered little improvement in certainty. Relatives of Mark and Rosa met with the investigator who reviewed timelines using harbor cameras and truck stops where the crew filled supplies. The video showed ordinary movement and no passenger joining the vessel after the final dock line came off during the slow morning push. Paul carried 2 sealed cases for measurement gear and strapped them near the galley, according to a dock worker who remembered quiet efficiency. Archive notes indicate the observer training emphasized low-profile behavior, which may explain the lack of distinct sightings beyond the first hour. The engine log from a previous trip listed high hours and a note about alternator heat, which can stress breakers and dim deck lights. A yard foreman later stated that heat could trip a breaker after vibration if terminals were not torqued during the final check. Records conflict on whether that refit included terminal torque checks, since the invoice lists parts and not the torque procedure by number. Some locals claimed they heard about a warm smell during a bar conversation, and none of the speakers signed any statement afterward. There was an argument about charts because the wheelhouse held both paper and digital sets according to the inventory taken after recovery. Paper charts in that region require careful updates and pencil marks, while plotters rely on software updates and cable connections that can hang. Investigators never confirmed which system guided the boat during the last hours because the recorder held only positions updated earlier near the harbor. State records note that redundancy helps until crews rely on one system and the other drifts out of use for long stretches. The hull appeared days later when a signer found wreckage east of Sitkaladak, where swells fold on a broad shoal during tide change. The bow section carried the name under scraped paint while the stern was missing, and bulkheads showed twisting that suggested sudden stress. Divers reported no entanglement in heavy gear and saw no obvious impact point on rock faces that would leave bright scars. Investigators never confirmed a single cause, and the summary listed loss of power compounded by weather and current as a probable sequence. Personal effects amounted to a thermos lid and a chipped mug and a jacket zipper with salt packed into the teeth and seams. The items offered no names, and the thermos bore a faded sticker from a bait shop in town that had closed years earlier. Families asked for the notebook and any data tool from the observer kit, and neither appeared in recovered material from the search. State records mark those items as missing and keep the case open for supplemental entries if new shoreline finds surface after storms. A small memorial gathered near the harbor ramp at sunset, while gulls drifted over the masts and the tide rolled out slowly. A pastor read names, and the dock crew lowered a wreath into the water while the siren sounded once at full volume. Some locals claimed a light blinked offshore when the last boat horn faded, and others saw only a buoy through fog. Investigators never confirmed any offshore light and listed the observed blink as a probable buoy reflection across layered haze. Months later, a fisherman turned in a laminated card with emergency numbers that he said he found in kelp near Sitkaladak. The card matched a common set used across fleets and held no writing on the back, where some captains add quick notes. County File from 2009 mentioned similar cards washing ashore after unrelated losses because lamination helps them travel long distances. Dispatch logs record the card as non-specific while acknowledging its timing within the season and its recovery location near recurring drift lines. The official closeout summarized timelines and conditions and kept the door open for later data in case anything else drifted ashore. The report called the loss a convergence of small failures shaped by marginal weather and ordinary risk that hardened quickly into consequence. Relatives requested another pass over the shoal when fall storms cleared, and the search teams deferred pending conditions that never reached stable levels. Some locals claimed the boat remains out there buried in shifting sand, while others argued it broke apart across two reefs. What remains certain is this simple sequence documented in state records and dispatch logs and archive notes preserved in town. 3 people left Kodiak in a working boat with a plan and a route and ordinary equipment and ordinary hopes. A record of small concerns laced through their days, and none looked fatal on its own given steady watch and time. Investigators never confirmed the final minutes, and the strait kept its water quiet while the workboats carried on with morning chores.